And now for an inside look at college sports with the men in the know, JC and Morgan. Here's Mike Morgan and JC Shurburtt.
Welcome in to the JC and Morgan podcast, your home for college football talk, college sports talk. We're the guys that know what's going on the inside. I want to welcome in my co-host here in episode 1, Mike Morgan from ESPN, joining me. We're going to take a whirlwind around what was a very exciting first weekend of college football. Mike, how are you doing today, my friend?
I am doing well. I am doing so much better than I was, I guess, before the first game of the college football season on Thursday night, or the first couple. So Wednesday, I would have been at about a 7, maybe a 6.5, but definitely at a 10 now. We're finally over the hump. We got week 1 in, and football season is here, so doing much better.
Absolutely. And it was just kind of a lot of exciting marquee matchups, I think, over the weekend, and a lot of maybe surprises, not shocks, I would say. I mean, there were some shocks kind of in some of the SEC openers. I mean, I think that, Mississippi State losing to South Alabama obviously was a shocking result. I think Southern Miss coming back on Kentucky, even though they were only a 6-point underdog, was sort of a surprising, kind of shocking result. But, with all the other games, they kind of turned out winners-wise how we felt. Houston and Oklahoma, maybe not, but most of them were. But it was still a very exciting weekend, particularly the Sunday night and Monday night games with Texas, Notre Dame, and then last night with Florida State and Ole Miss.
Yeah, those were ridiculously good, and I would also double back on the game you mentioned in Oklahoma-Houston. I don't think it's shocking. I do think what Coach Herman has going on at Houston is the real deal. We should have known that after what they did to Florida State last year in the bowl game. That was not a fluke. As you know, keeping up with recruiting as well as you do, they're getting the kind of athletes in there that they haven't gotten in a long, long time. And they've got a quarterback. So when you add all that up, and oh, by the way, Oklahoma seems to do this almost every year, lose a game and everybody thinks they should win, and then stub their toe and kind of train wreck their chances of winning a national title. That just seems to happen every year. So I thought that wasn't shocking, but it sure as heck was entertaining. That was another great ball game. I would start off as a jumping point, JC, and just say, first of all, this is yet another benefit of having a college football playoff, finally, is that you saw more coaches roll the dice and say, I'm going to take a chance taking a loss in week 1 by scheduling a marquee opponent out of conference, because I know if I do lose it, I still have a chance. It's more difficult, but I've got 11 or 12 more games to make a case for the college football playoff and a national championship. The moment that goes away, we as college football fans, we lose out, because week 1 used to be, let's face it, kind of a dud for the most part.
Yeah.
You have like 2 good games, and the rest of them were just your typical Power 5 school beating up on an FCS opponent or something commensurate to that. So happy that we have this. I hope this is not an aberration. I hope we keep seeing week 1 look like this every year. It's going to calm down a little bit in week 2 with the schedule, but great matchups overall, a number of games that, even if they weren't surprising, they were still really entertaining. I think the bottom of the SEC certainly got humbled, but let's not overdo it. It's not as if the SEC all of a sudden is a terrible league because Kentucky did not look good, Arkansas did not look good, and even Vanderbilt taking on another SEC team did not look good. That's something that's going to happen. If you're going to judge a conference by the bottom up, then you're going to look at a lot of conferences and say, well, the Big Ten's bad because they got Rutgers. The Big 12 is bad because they got Iowa State. And we can play that game all day long. What people care about is the top down. And top down, the SEC schools, Alabama looked unbelievable. Georgia won a dogfight with North Carolina. I know Florida wasn't overly impressive, but at least they have their quarterback situation resolved, it looks like, with Del Rio, and so on and so forth. So I think people love to take shots at the SEC when they think it's vulnerable, but let's pump the brakes on that a little bit.
Oh, they absolutely do. There's a lot of haters out there with regards to the SEC. But while we dive into this, though, I want to start with the Big 12, and also Houston. We mentioned Houston. And here's my fresh take on the Houston Cougars. You go through and you look at what they did last year, winning a conference championship. During their regular season, probably their best win was at Louisville, and then maybe at home against Vanderbilt. Out of conference, I know they beat some good teams within the conference like Memphis. Then they go to the bowl game and they beat Florida State. And I heard this the other day during I think either the Houston broadcast or the Florida State broadcast. And Florida State is in the Peach Bowl. That's not the goal in Tallahassee that they write out before the season every year. We want to go to the Peach Bowl.
Right.
Woohoo, And you think Houston's probably fired up to be there, because they're there in a group of five or Power Five or playoff type bowl. And Houston, ran it up 38-24, and they probably could have had more. And Florida State did not play well in that game. So I think that the takeaway from that on New Year's Eve was FSU just didn't show up, and Houston bit them. But what they said was that the Florida State coaches and Jimbo Fisher and everybody else, and I've been told this too, is that Florida State had a great week of practice, showed up prepared, took the game seriously. They just got beat. Mm-hmm. Now, you get to the Oklahoma game, there's no way the Sooners are going to take a season opener lightly. And they just got beat. Yep. So at this point, you have to think Houston is for real. Tom Herman, you mentioned his recruiting. They have a 5-star defensive tackle in Ed Oliver that outside of Dexter Lawrence's performance for Clemson probably had the best opening game for a freshman defensive lineman in the country this past weekend. Disruptive. That's the type of recruiting that they're doing down there now. And they beat Oklahoma. Tom Herman, in my opinion, is a top 5 coach in the country, even with what little he's proven so far at Houston.
I've spoken to more than one administrator this past offseason, and they have looked into Tom Herman. Some of them have talked to Tom Herman, and as we all know, Tom Herman has been interviewed already multiple times for different jobs. And I think Tom Herman, the goal was pretty clear. The next job he takes would likely be in the Lone Star State. He's going to have his choice of almost any job out there. He is the real deal. This is a guy that was the offensive coordinator at Ohio State when they won the national title, took everybody by storm going 13-1 last year, and he just has that it factor. And he's all in on Houston now, and I believe it. And if they can somehow get in the Big 12, which is a whole other discussion on why it is the Big 12 does not seem to want Houston in there. But if they could somehow pull that off, I think they could actually keep Tom Herman, because those Texas schools, as I like to say, every Power 5 school has its big boosters, and they all like to think they've all got big money. But what I have found doing a lot of games, not just at the premier schools in the state of Texas, even those so-called ones on the periphery, like a Houston, like a Baylor, like a TCU, there's regular money, and then there's oil money, as in Texas money, okay? And if Houston could get in the Big 12, which is enough to sell Tom Herman on staying, they're not going to lose a bidding war, in my estimation, at Houston. This has always been, to me, a sleeping giant program. I've called a few games there back when it was Case Keenum at quarterback, and, of course, you had Kevin Sumlin as the head coach. And the only thing is I was sitting there in the press box looking around thinking to myself, why is it this is not a top 25 program every year? They played in a dilapidated Robertson Stadium that just was so far under par. It just was not up to speed with what you needed to be. And now they've got their brand new stadium as of 2014, and so you can't use that as a way to knock them down anymore. If you were to take a 50-mile radius from downtown Houston and just recruit that area, I mean, it's almost like recruiting South Florida. It's like it's getting that Palm Beach, Broward, Dade County deal. They can win and win consistently if they keep Herman and if they get into a big league. The American is just, I don't think the American's built for the long haul, because there's so many things you have to do to sneak in that playoff. You almost have to be perfect every year to do it in a league like that. But if the Big 12 ever kind of puts their guard down and says, okay, this might mean a few more losses for Texas, might be a few more losses for Oklahoma and TCU and Baylor, but it's good for the overall league, then I think Houston could be a regular power.
I agree, and you mentioned that, and you think about the setup there with the recruiting. What's the difference between the University of Houston and the University of Miami, really, in terms of the aerial, the radius that you can go and attract top players. And Houston's awfully close to the state of Louisiana too, where, honestly, LSU's not going to take every single great player out of that state every year. You look at the recruiting, TCU goes over there and gets pretty good kids. Texas goes and gets kids out of there. A&M goes and recruits that state pretty well. So geographically, they're really set up. All right, keeping on the Big 12 topic here, Texas, we all watch Charlie Strong's team. And this may be the caveat with Herman ultimately moving down the road to Austin, is that Charlie Strong's team has suddenly come alive. They look like they have a quarterback in Shane Buechele. What an exciting game with Notre Dame, 50-47 in overtime. A tremendous opening, I think, and a good win for Strong and the Longhorns.
Well, it was a great win. There's no question about it. I don't know if it was worthy of carrying the coach off the field. It's 1-0 now. we got a long season to go, but it's certainly something. I think there was just kind of this feeling in the air that, okay, Charlie's got to get this one. If Charlie doesn't get this one, the wheels can start falling off. There's already a heavy sentiment that he's not the guy, whether it's justified or not. This has not been a good couple of years for Charlie Strong at Texas. And what's weird about it is, if you go back to last year, and they had some embarrassing losses last year, but then they put it all together to win the Red River Shootout. So when you win a game like that, it's two ways of looking at it. You say, hey, well, look, Charlie had him coached up for a big game against Oklahoma. The other way to look at it is well, Charlie's got enough talent that he should be winning more of these games. And I think that's the way a lot of Texas fans are going to look at it. So there's been a lot of warm and fuzzies with Charlie Strong winning that game last night, Sunday night, and that's great. But I think that at some point, they're just got to be more consistent. There's no reason why Texas can't be winning Big 12 championships with Charlie Strong now. This is no longer a Mac Brown didn't leave a whole lot in the closet argument. This is, can Charlie Strong do it argument. And I want to see them do it. I want to see them put up or shut up the rest of the year because they've got the talent. I mean, they certainly have the talent. The recruiting has been good under Charlie Strong. For whatever reason, the last couple of years hasn't quite clicked, but I think now they're looking more like a Texas team, 1 through 85 on scholarship kids. And if they all of a sudden get back, now you wonder, okay, what does the Big 12 look like? Because Oklahoma obviously was disappointing in that first game. Everybody's expecting TCU to take a step back without Trevon Boykin. Oklahoma State just seems to be kind of stuck in a pattern where they're going to win a good amount of games, or they're going to go to a decent bowl game, but they're not really going to compete for a Big 12. Kansas State's not what it was a few years ago. So, I mean, this is the year that could certainly be the one that Charlie finally breaks through and brings home a Big 12 championship.
Absolutely. And sticking with the Big 12 finally, the Oklahoma loss, looking at it from the Sooners' perspective. Now my theory about Oklahoma and a lot of the Big 12, and I don't include Texas or TCU or Kansas State sort of in this discussion. This is for the Baylors and the Oklahoma States and the Oklahomas of the world and the Texas Techs. I think their style of play hurts them. The style of play they use in that league, even though it's very exciting to watch on TV and we all love seeing points scored, I think the style of play in that league, when they get into a playoff situation, when they play like a Clemson, a team that can also go fast but also has a very good defense like last year in the Orange Bowl. I sat here all week in upstate South Carolina and called Clemson winning by several touchdowns, just because I knew Clemson was the best defense Oklahoma had faced all year. And when you do that and you try to go a million miles an hour and you try to throw it all over the field and you face a good defense like that and you're not used to it, you're going to go 3 and out. The tempo is going to hurt your defense and you're going to end up getting gashed.
Right.
So that's kind of my theory overall on the Big 12. But at Oklahoma specifically, we're starting to kind of see a pattern emerge where when the stakes are high, Oklahoma is not Oklahoma anymore. Big Game Bob is not there. When the stakes are low, they kind of jump up and bite people sometimes, like Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. So what's your theory now on the Sooners heading into, we're chugging through the second decade of Stoops out there?
It's interesting. I was on a talk show the other day, and we were talking about Mark Richt getting fired at Georgia. And the host was kind of incredulous about the fact, how can you fire a guy that for 15 years won 10 games a year? And my point was, it's not that Mark Richt got fired because he did a terrible job. It's just sometimes it's time. And I'm not saying Bob Stoops should be fired here, but what I'm saying is Bob Stoops is a good coach. Bob Stoops has done a lot of good things at Oklahoma. That point is not disputed. But I do see an issue with Bob Stoops where every year it seems like this happens. And I know that you and I talked about this back in the summer, and I was trying to compile some research on some of Stoops' losses because I was on a talk show in Atlanta and I wanted to come up with a segment where I don't think the term Clemsoning is applicable anymore. Remember, that was kind of the in vogue thing to say every year Clemson was going to lose a game that they shouldn't and kind of train wreck their season, and that became like a verb. Oh, well, they're going to Clemson it. They're Clemsoning. Obviously, Dabo's cleaned that up here lately.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think we need a new term. It's called getting stooped, and Oklahoma gets stooped every year. I mean, they do this. It seems like every single season they find a game. Now, again, I'm not taking away anything from Houston because they're legit, as we already talked about, but they do come up with a situation where stuff happens in a game like that. You talk about the missed field goal return for a touchdown. That just shouldn't happen. There's things that happens in big games. Last year losing to Texas when Texas was down and out, and you lay an egg against the Longhorns. This is unfortunately going to be part of the Bob Stoops legacy. Yes, it's going to be a national title. Yes, it's going to be he took Oklahoma from the bottom to a much better mark. But fired or not, coach or not, it just seems like Oklahoma can't get out of its own way every year. And I got to imagine one of the most frustrating things right now to be as a fan of Oklahoma, because every year you're good, and that's a credit to Bob Stoops. Mm-hmm. And every year you win a lot of games, and that's also a credit to Bob Stoops. But every year you find a way to kick yourself in the crotch and knock yourself out of the national championship race. And unfortunately for Bob Stoops, that has to go under him as well.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. And sometimes, I've been reading Steve Spurrier wrote a book in case anybody out there has been living under a rock, because he's certainly gotten out and promoted it quite a bit. And I've been reading the book, and he mentioned something, about when he left Florida that, sometimes it's just time and sometimes you've just been there too long. And he always tells the story about how his dad left the churches he used to work at. His dad was a minister because he figured the congregation was sick of hearing his sermons. Sometimes you need a new voice. And right. I think that was the idea at Georgia, and you can get into did Rick deserve to be fired or not kind of thing all you want. And I think those points are valid. But the idea was maybe they need new blood, Mm-hmm. I tend to think that at Georgia, it was more that, we're falling really far behind Alabama, and we deserve, we need to be Alabama because arguably Georgia has more resources than Alabama and should be better. And they just weren't getting there under Rick. So I think that was kind of a factor there too. With Oklahoma, it could just be, hey, you need new blood or whatever. And I'm certainly not advocating firing Bob Stoops, but, it may just be time. And there's probably half a dozen to a dozen Division I programs that would, make room for Bob Stoops tomorrow if he wanted to come coach over there. So I think
right. And by no means do I think that he's on a true hot seat. I mean, I'm sure it'll be rumored about if they lose another game to a team that they're favored against at some point. It seems like that comes up every other year in Norman. I don't think it's really realistic. Mm-mm. But the fact of the matter is you can kind of draw some parallels because those are two programs that got a lot going for them. And they're two coaches, Stoops and the job that Mark Richt did over 15 years, both quality jobs, both enhance the program, but they're both programs that have so many advantages that your level of expectations is higher as a fan base. To go back to Rick, you don't win an SEC championship in 10 years. And you say, well, what about Alabama? It wasn't just Alabama. I mean, Florida was winning them. Florida was getting to Atlanta with lackluster teams. You had South Carolina, of course, went to one. All these other things happened where there's room for somebody else other than Alabama to be good in the Southeastern Conference, okay? Mm-hmm. More than Alabama, and you might even say LSU as kind of 1B in that regard. Georgia should be playing for SEC championships, and they should at some point be playing for a national championship. Does it change the fact that Mark Richt did a lot of good things? No. But at some point, you have to take a a look at it and say, okay, is this as far as we can go? Have we peaked with this particular coach? And at some point, I really wonder if Oklahoma fans are going to say, okay, we've peaked. We cannot get over this hump right now, and so maybe a change is inevitable. You know, and again, we're talking about a couple of years down the road, in my estimation, if things don't improve. But I just think, particularly when you've had Texas down, right? I mean, Texas is never going to be more down than they've been the last few years, and I don't know if Oklahoma's been able to take as much advantage of that as they should.
I agree with you there, certainly. And, one more thing about Richt, and then we're going to go around the SEC. I think one play was the beginning of the end with him, and that was when Conley fell down in the SEC championship game against Alabama. That was like – I was at that game, Mike. It's the best game I've ever seen in person.
Incredible game.
And I was sitting there in the stands, and Georgia played – lights out. There was no underachievement like Georgia does sometimes. There were no like situations where you sat there and went, Georgia's not ready to play or Georgia's going to do this. They took it to a very good Alabama football team, and they had the game right there. It went back and forth, and Georgia's driving there at the end, and he falls down, and that sort of summed it up, because after that, they did, Missouri then won 2 straight SEC East titles.
Right.
And Georgia never got back. And so it was a situation where, I think that's what happened there. All right, let's go around the SEC right now. We'll start off last Thursday night. I know a lot of people who are fans of yours and mine are interested in hearing this take on the Thursday night game between South Carolina and Vanderbilt. 13-10 Gamecock win in Nashville. Sort of told everybody before the game I wasn't buying the Derek Mason hype or the Kyle Shurburtt hype, and I thought South Carolina had a good chance to win. Didn't say they would, but I thought that even with the inexperience on the roster, that South Carolina could go up there and get a W. What was your takeaway from that game in Nashville?
Yeah, it's funny. You weren't buying that hype, and I wasn't buying. I know there were some people back in the Palmetto State that were thinking this was going to be a runaway for the Gamecocks. I wasn't buying that either. I was kind of right in the middle. I'm thinking, you got 2 teams offensively that got a lot of things to work on. And I'm thinking low-scoring, ugly, and last possession type game. And that's kind of what it was. I mean, it could have been a coin flip. It easily could have been Vanderbilt 13-10. But it was, the weird thing about that game that stood out to me is that Vanderbilt goes up 10-0, and it felt as if they were trying to protect the lead with another 30 minutes left in the game. Mm-hmm. 10 points, you got to have a lot of confidence in your defense to think that that's going to be enough to win a college football game in 2016. But it just seemed like some things that they were doing on offense were painfully conservative. They went ahead and tried Freebeck. Some people would argue at the wrong time. I know Coach Mason said that was predetermined, but they still have some issues on offense. And I think this is going to be a trend for a lot of teams in the SEC this year. We've never seen a season, once you get past Kelly of Ole Miss and Dobbs of Tennessee, who also did not look great in their game on Thursday night, you have complete quarterback uncertainty. At almost, the 80% of this league has complete quarterback uncertainty. And it might be more before the season's over, depending on how things go down. And so you're going to have some ragged offensive play. And some of that's going to be because of great SEC defense. And we know the Southeastern Conference, year in, year out, is the best defensive conference in college football. I don't even think that's much of a debate. We can argue what the best conference is every year, but top to bottom defensively, it's the best league. That doesn't mean when you watch a 13-10 game that was all great defense. That was some lackluster offense too. And both those teams have room to improve in that area. I love Ralph Webb at tailback, and Blossomgame is a guy I thought would be an X factor. He was, but then again, when they went up 10-0, they just couldn't get anything going. That's partially a credit to the Gamecock defense. Carolina on offense, McElwain obviously has some talent and ability, but he's not there yet. Orth is more steady. I love what they got out of the freshman stud receiver. That looks like another Alshon Jeffrey to me. Yeah. But I think bottom line is both those teams, and this is going to be the same with Kentucky, maybe Arkansas, Auburn right now with all kinds of quarterback and running back issues. If you don't have great quarterback play in college football, you are going to have a lot of inconsistency and a lot of struggles. And I think both those teams are going to have to win games on defense. They're going to have to win battles with turnovers, a few mistakes, because they're not going to light up scoreboards in Columbia or Nashville. At least I don't see it right now.
Absolutely. I think, too, that when you look at it, the idea in Nashville, I think, was that Kyle Shurburtt had made all these strides. And here's the thing about Vanderbilt, the bottom line. You cannot – I don't believe fundamentally, unless you are Alabama or LSU or it's sometimes Texas A&M will get a good – I don't think you can recruit the offensive lineman because that's the one position in the South. You know, you've got players – but it's not like DBs or receivers or running backs where there's just this plethora of talent. You know, offensive linemen in the South there are more of them in other parts of the country. Look at Alabama. They have the best offensive line in the league year after year. You know, they go to Iowa and get guys. They go to Minnesota and get guys. They go to California and get guys. They also recruit locally, but the offensive line class every year, if you look at what Mario Cristobal does, he goes all over the country and gets guys and pieces it together, and they're good. I'm not saying that's necessarily why they are good specifically, but it's hard. You're at Vanderbilt and you're trying to be Wisconsin or Stanford on offense. It's not going to work in this league. I just don't think it will. I mean, you saw Vanderbilt. They gashed the Gamecocks sometimes. They were able to get some good run plays off, especially with Blasingame, and Webb was effective. But if you don't have a passing game to back it up, or you refuse to pass the football, or you're going to be ultra conservative, you're not going to be able to beat very many teams, especially at Vanderbilt where recruiting is such a challenge. That's my take on that.
No, I think there's a lot of validity to that, and I always go back to the same thing, and that is, you know, I don't care who's in your backfield. At some point, 3rd and 7 is going to come up in a key spot, and if you don't have a quarterback that can read the defense, rifle it in a tight window and make the key throw, you're going to have problems. You just are. I mean, you saw Georgia battle North Carolina, which I thought was one of the more underrated games over the weekend. And North Carolina got gashed with their run defense last year. It was atrocious. Everybody remembers the bowl game against Baylor. And surely Chubb did what you thought he would do. I mean, he ran for over 200 yards, for crying out loud. That was a 2-point game with under 4 minutes to go. Georgia gets the benefit of what I thought was a terrible call. You're going to see a lot of this call in the college football this year. We had a conference call with the head of SEC official, Steve Shaw. Ineligible receiver downfield. Linemen have been kind of sneaking up when a quarterback scrambles and they go past that 3-yard window, and a lot of time that was not called. It's going to be called. You're going to see that. It's a major point of emphasis. It is going to be called a lot this year in college football, and it's going to ruin a lot of good drives and good plays because they're looking for it now. In that particular play, I don't think there was a guy past 3 yards downfield, and then Fedora compounds it with a 15-yard unsportsmanlike penalty. But my point is, even with all that, they still almost lost the game. Even with Chubb getting over 200 yards, it was a 2-point game with under 4 minutes to go because Eason might become a stud in a first-round draft pick, but he's not there yet. And Grayson Lambert is just a very average quarterback. So if you don't have a guy that can make plays in the passing game, or to your argument, if you just don't want to call the kind of plays to take those chances, you're going to be in a lot of tight spots where you're going to be on the wrong end of the stick. You have to be able to throw the football to be a really good football team. In this day and age of college football, we're not in the 80s of the SEC where you can just ground and pound it. Look at how all these conferences have morphed into a different type of playing where you don't have to spread it, but you better be able to throw it at some point in time.
Speaking of this, this is a wonderful transition. How about LSU going to Lambeau Field and losing to Wisconsin? I mean, man, no offense to Wisconsin, because I love that program. I think they overachieve every year in all sports, really. They overachieve in basketball, football. You know, Badger fans are the greatest. But honestly, I did not – I felt like hey, I believed Les Miles. The offense has been fixed. You have 5-star talent at receiver. You've got 2 of the best running backs in the SEC. And I do say 2 because Darius Geis is very good too and very capable. Surely they fixed their offense. Surely Wisconsin's not going to be able to hang with them. Wisconsin not only hangs with them, they win the game straight up. LSU has 1 touchdown in that game. Everybody's worried about doing the Lambeau leap. There wasn't going to be that many opportunities, brother.
I don't want to pile on, but it's hard to watch Brandon Harris play quarterback. I mean, it really is. Look, we're talking about a guy that's been starting games for 3 years, a top 10 recruit at his position, a guy that I'm sure, like so many of Les Miles' quarterbacks, when they walk off the bus, you're thinking, oh, man, this kid's a stud. We're going to have a hard time beating this guy if he's their quarterback. But then so often they go out there and they lay an egg, and they've gone through how many offensive coordinators now? In Les Miles' 12 years, too many to count.
Yeah.
So you can't just blame it on the coordinators every year. At some point, it would seem to me like they've got to make a conscious decision. You've got athletes everywhere else. You got stud athletes at every position at LSU. Maybe you ought to find a quarterback. If you go back to those national championship years, they didn't necessarily have the stud athletes. Maybe you ought to just go to a guy that can manage the game a little bit better, make some throws, doesn't run a 4.40, but you got so many guys around him that can run a 4.40. You got Leonard Fournette in the backfield, for crying out loud. I can't figure it. And look, they're not buried, JC. They're one of those teams I was talking about at the beginning with a 4-team playoff. Their season is not over. It is not over. They still have Alabama at home. They can go on a run with that talent. But I don't know how you're going to do it with Brandon Harris at quarterback.
Absolutely. Here's the thing about Harris, too. He was a stud recruit. I loved him coming out of high school. But I felt like when he picked LSU over Texas A&M, that I was hopeful for his sake that LSU was going to sort of modify what they did on offense scheme, because he's a dual threat guy. He's a guy that needs to get involved in the running game, be in the shotgun, run tempo, and he can be effective in that type of. If he were at Arizona State, we wouldn't be talking about how bad Brandon Harris was, because but that system with Cam Cameron, the NFL thing, it's just not for him. He's never going to be effective in it. And to your point, too, LSU's 2 national championship teams, and I realize one was under Saban in 2003. Matt Mock,
right?
Not to be confused with former Missouri quarterback Matty Mock.
Right.
Matt Mock.
Different lifestyles between those two.
Yeah, Matt Mock was the quarterback in 2003. And in 2007, they did have Perilou that they brought in for some plays, but that was Flynn's.
Guy, right?
That was Flynn's team, and they're game managers and they're good. And I think that's what you have to have at LSU. It's a shame. I feel bad for guys like Malachi Dupree and Durrell and all their receivers that are out there. I mean, those guys are studs. I mean, it's got to be tough. I think, to your point, Les Miles has to win out. And I'm not saying has to win out necessarily to keep his job, but to keep this season from being a disappointment, they need to win out. I don't know. Win out may be too harsh. They need to win the SEC West and get in the college football playoff. That's it's that or bust for them right now, and I don't see how they do it.
Well, nobody could accuse you of jumping the gun or being provocative just for the sake of being provocative. Heck, they almost fired him last year.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, okay.
They almost fired him last year, and now you have a junior running back that most people thought would have been a top 10 pick in the NFL draft last year as a sophomore if he was able to come out. You've got NFL wide receivers. You've got NFL guys on defense. You've got all this going for you. And with all due respect to Wisconsin, you lay an egg. You lay an egg in week 1. And again, I don't think you're talking crazy when you say that. I think there's going to be a lot of kind of that negative energy in the air, or as we like to call it, the noise. There's going to be a lot of noise in Baton Rouge if they don't win at least every game but Alabama. And you look at their schedule, I mean, at Auburn, at Florida, those are the toughest road games. And then if they finish at Texas A&M November 24th, you'll be forgiven for a lot of sins if you beat Alabama on November the 5th. There's no doubt about that. But if they stub their toe one more time and put up a couple hundred yards of offense with ragged quarterback play, that's just something LSU fans have seen too much of in 12 years, where I think it could get real ugly for Les in a hurry.
Yeah, I think so too. And last year, I mean, he barely survived, and then he kind of, acted like he had a mandate all of a sudden, like a guy that barely wins the election, and then he governs with a mandate. He doesn't make a change at OC, and sort of paid some lip service to changes on offense. That's the same LSU offense I've been watching for a long time.
And let me just say that, because there might be some people tuning into this for the first time, and they haven't heard you or they haven't heard me. I like Les Miles. I mean, I think he's great for college football. From an entertainment standpoint, I hope the guy keeps his job. I hope Les Miles stays in the SEC for another 12 years. So this is not – nobody's hating on Les Miles. Les Miles, I think, is one of the most liked coaches in college football from a media standpoint. But at some point, you just got to say enough is enough. And if they can't figure out how to put offense on the board with elite athletes every year, that's a problem. And that ultimately points to your head coach.
Yeah, me too. I love Les Miles. I think he's a great guy. Great. You never hear his players say anything bad about him. It's just this is kind of an intervention. What I'm talking to. I mean, it's just like, hey, man. You did all this, and you were almost gone last year, out the door, and they almost sent you up the river. And you were lucky that you survived, and you didn't change anything. I mean that's the definition of madness, Les. So speaking of madness and quarterbacks, let's look at the Auburn-Clemson game. I mean, I thought that was. I admire the effort by Gus Malzahn. I think it's a very Malzahn thing to do what he did, but didn't work. They have to be kind of kicking themselves, because I think their defense played well enough, and Clemson did not really – I mean, Clemson's still kind of getting things rolling on offense. Auburn's defense played well enough for them to win that football game, but 2 turnovers inside the 10 combined with the musical quarterbacks was not a good look, I don't think.
No, it wasn't, and I'm not patting myself on the shoulder here, the back, because I'm sure I'll get plenty of predictions wrong throughout this season. But week 1 for me, for the most part, I feel like I had a good feel for most of the games, what happened, who won, how the game went. Kind of went as expected. The one curveball I did not see, and maybe I was selling Auburn's defense short. I mean, I think Clemson's good enough where they should score 30 on everybody, and I thought they'd get 30, not just because they're good and not because the Auburn defense isn't good, but because this is the same movie, and unfortunately for Auburn fans, with some of the same actors. Now, they've had some running backs dismissed and transferred, and they've had some issues there, but he just continues to go to Jeremy Johnson. I don't know what he hopes to find there, but it hadn't showed up. I mean, it's Jeremy Johnson 2.0, 3.0. It's the same-looking quarterback to me, and Gus Malzahn, I mean, he's out there running every high school play he came up with in Arkansas and Arkansas State, and I give him credit for creativity. But when you don't have the quarterback that can run his system, and you don't have running backs, and that's the misnomer about a Gus Malzahn offense. I think a lot of people think it's just throwing it all over the field. When he's at his best, they're running it 40 times. And a lot of those runs will be quarterback runs, but he is running it. And I don't know if they've got the backs to do that right now. And from a quarterback standpoint, at times, it is a mess. I mean, it's just an absolute mess. And it's a shame, because his defense played their tails off and gave them a chance to pull off what would have been the upset of the weekend, in my estimation, if Auburn wins that game over a team that most people think is going to be playing for a national championship in Clemson. But they're so anemic on offense. They're so hard to watch on offense. It's a lot of similar things to what we're talking about with LSU. The difference is, right now, I mean, they're trying 3 different quarterbacks, and I don't know who the answer is. Maybe it's Sean White at this point, but I know I don't think the answer is, and that's Jeremy Johnson.
Yeah, I think, White to me is limited in the quarterback run game. I think just looking at it from a personnel standpoint, we finally, the hope. My hope in hoping for them, I guess, was that Johnson would improve. I thought he had a good bowl game last year, and he's got some physical tools, but obviously he's not there. And I don't know how much of that is that he can't get into a rhythm because they're shuffling him in and out. I think the Franklin kid's an excellent runner. So if you're down to White or Franklin, you have to kind of pick your poison. You either got the guy that's limited in the run game that can make the throws, or you got to have the guy that's just a quarterback runner, and you got to hope that you can dice people up that way. If I'm Gus Malzahn, his offense is not special when you don't have quarterback run game and all the shifts and all the gashing up front that they can do when that thing's really humming. Just his passing spread attack is nothing special. It's not any different than, Ole Miss or whoever runs your typical spread in the SEC. So in my opinion, I'd sink or swim with the runner. And I know that sounds crazy because, Sean White had a lot of good throws the other night and their receivers are supposed to be good, but I would definitely shore up my run game first because they've done it before with Nick Marshall. Nick Marshall was obviously a better passer than Franklin, but he was a guy that, hey, they wanted him to run the football. He ran it, and then the passing came. So I think that's the thing there. Yeah. Looking back at another – I guess, performance that was sort of lackluster. Tennessee comes into this season with a ton of hype. I don't know that Tennessee people should panic about going to overtime with App. I thought they looked uninspired. I thought they looked like they didn't want to be there. I think we'll see a different team in Bristol on Saturday night against the Hokies. Mm-hmm. But, that's just my initial take on it. Certainly it wasn't a pretty ball game and a game that Appalachian State definitely could have won.
Well, and here's a note to college football fans, because I hear this said all the time. People lump in a program, any non-Power 5 program, they all think is just dog food. And any FCS program, it's all dog food. Now, App State's made that transition, but they were a dominating program at FCS, several national championships, several playoffs. They had a lot of returning starters. I'm not sitting here and telling you I thought that game would be close because I didn't, but it's not the kind of team that I'd want to schedule in week one because, if you're going to schedule a non-Power 5 school, make sure you do one that is just going to be a W that you're not going to have to sweat. And they're out there because contrary to popular fan belief, not all of these lackluster, quote-unquote, non-Power 5 schools are built the same way. There's a big difference playing Richmond of the FCS level versus Alcorn State. They're not built the same. There's a big difference between playing a Southern Miss versus Eastern Michigan. It's just you have to really look into grab your Phil Steele guide and look at some of the rankings and everything else and understand that they're not all the same. Not every MAC team is built the same way. Not every Sun Belt team, not every Conference USA team is built the same way. So if you really want to chalk up an easy W, because if you beat App State, no one cares. Everybody says, well, you should have. And if you lose, then everybody says, how in the world did you lose that game? So I'd be real careful as a coach. When I pick those non-Power 5 opponents, I'm going to find the worst one on the board because they're not going to help me. I might as well find the one that's terrible. As far as Tennessee goes specifically, I had them in the Outback Bowl last year on a radio broadcast, and they destroyed Northwestern, and that was kind of where the hype machine really reached its apex going into this year because everybody saw all the guys coming back on offense. They've got great running backs, and they've got one of the few veteran quarterbacks in the league, and they've got some monsters on defense. I would just say this. Joshua Dobbs, great kid, can make some plays, but I know the guy that I worked with is a former NFL defensive back on that broadcast, and he saw it right away in the first quarter and kept commenting. Even as Tennessee's rolling up the points, he says, Mike, he's not reading defenses, and he's really erratic with his arm. And that would scare me if I'm Tennessee going the rest of the way. There's a lot of things I like about Tennessee. I picked them to win the Eastern Division kind of by default. I don't know who else I can go with right now and feel real good about. But again, at some point, Joshua Dobbs is going to have to make some key throws in a game, and that's the one thing about that squad that concerns me a little bit, because I'm with you. They're going to get back up for Virginia Tech. They're not going to sleepwalk for an opponent like that in Bristol. They're going to get up for all their conference games, but I don't know if their quarterback position is as great as a lot of people are making it out to be.
Their backup, Quentin Dormady, he's a guy out of Texas. He can throw the football. Probably more consistent than Dobbs. Dobbs is the senior leader of that team, though, and I think they're just going to have to live and die by him and his performance, because, like you made the point earlier, eventually you're going to get to 3rd and 7. Eventually you're going to have to convert. And Dobbs, I'll admit, and I love Josh Dobbs. I think he's a wonderful kid. I thought when he signed with Tennessee, his commitment and signing, because he was committed to Arizona State and was going to go out there and play baseball and football for the longest time. He's out of Atlanta. And Tennessee came in, Butch flipped him. I thought it was one of the most significant signings because I looked at Tennessee's quarterbacks and, I'm seeing Justin Worley. And, I'm like, well, this kid can really make some things happen. And I love him. I think he's a great kid. He's a guy that, after I covered him in recruiting, I get thank you messages from him on Facebook sometimes. Wonderful kid. But you're right. His arm and the passing apparatus with the Tennessee offense is not as consistent as maybe it could be, or as consistent as it needs to be for them to win championships, in my opinion. The backup can do it. The Dormady can do it. He's more of a Texas gunslinger type, so it'll be interesting to see. I think that game in Bristol is going to be tremendous. I think it's going to be a great spectacle. That city is outstanding. It's a town it's weird, Mike, because and I'm sure you've been there before, but it's a town way up on the Tennessee-Virginia border.
Right.
And it's a town where half the town is Vols fans and half the town are Hokie fans. And they never play.
Yep.
I mean, and so it's like you're just sitting there going, wow, this should be like right here in this corner of the world. Yeah. This is a huge rivalry, and these guys never play each other. So it's kind of
it's crazy. It's great for college football, though. I'm glad we've got it. It could be a record crowd for a college football game.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, if Pitt and Penn State can play college football against each other again, why can't we get Tennessee and Va Tech? I think Tennessee regroups, and I do think they put it together. They win that game. They beat Ohio the following week. And then, look, it's going to be defined real early for them.
The Florida Gators.
Oh, my
goodness.
Florida at home, September the 24th. They haven't beat Florida in over a decade. And let's just say it comes together and they finally get that monkey off their back. They do what they should have done last year before they gagged it away. Well, then the next week you go to Athens to play Georgia. By then, I think you're going to see the Eason kids starting at quarterback. Mm-hmm. Then at Texas A&M. Yep. Then Alabama at home. That is as brutal a 4-game stretch as maybe any team has in the country. By the way, there's no bye weeks in between that.
Yeah, there's just back to back to back.
Back to back to back to back. Florida, Georgia, A&M, Alabama with no bye weeks. So if they survive that, I'm sold. If they even go 3-1, I'm a big believer that they are going to do what everybody thinks they should do, and that's win the East this year.
They are going to prove themselves worthy if they get through that gauntlet, Mike.
No doubt.
So yeah, Tennessee. So that's all good with them. I think that we'll see what happens in Bristol Saturday night. I want to go back really quick to 2 games that we mentioned: Auburn and LSU. Auburn plays Arkansas State at home this weekend.
Right.
And that's one of those teams that I would never schedule.
Yep.
Especially if you're Auburn and you're very familiar with Arkansas State, obviously. I would never schedule them. And then LSU, while I don't think they're in any danger of losing, they play Jacksonville State, which took Auburn to the wire last year.
Yeah.
I mean, so these are 2 games to kind of keep an eye on. Ole Miss actually plays Wofford, which is a triple option team. And after what happened last night to Florida State, I don't know that I want to play them either. But
remember Jacksonville State beating Ole Miss a few years ago in Oxford? Remember that one?
I mean, these are games. And finally, and this is an ACC kind of deal, and we'll kind of transition into some ACC talk now. If I'm the University of Virginia, I will never schedule the Richmond Spiders again. I mean, these guys, they blew them out 37-20. I'm like, man, that's a tough start for Bronco Mendenhall up there.
I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Not all FCS schools are built the same way. If you want to play a 1AA school, great, do it. But find one that's terrible. There's plenty of them that are not good. I mean, if you just want a paycheck game where you have a virtual guaranteed win, if you can go up and down the FCS power rankings, and I'll find you some, and they'll take that check, and you'll feel good about yourself. You'll rack up 40 points, and you can breathe easy and pick up a win. There was a few years ago, where the ACC, they had like 3 games against the Colonial Conference and lost all 3 of them. So they might want to not just stay away from Richmond, but the entire league over there. There's some FCS schools you just don't want to mess with, and that's one of them. I don't know why they keep putting them on the schedule. It's one thing to be nice to help your in-state brethren out, but that's ridiculous. I mean, that's a heck of a way to get a new coaching era started up there in Charlottesville.
Absolutely, and here's another one for you coming up in a couple of weeks. Miami, who we're going to briefly talk about now. Mark Richt and company, in 2 weeks, they have to go at Appalachian State in Boone, North Carolina.
Which is a great stadium, by the way. I've called a playoff game there. That is a cool – you are way up there, way up above sea level.
Yeah.
To get the oxygen tanks on the sideline ready. But very cool place to play. But, yeah, you're right. I doubt Mark Richt scheduled that one. I'm guessing that one was in the hopper for a couple of years.
Yeah, no doubt.
That's a rough go of it. And since we talked about Mark Richt earlier, I do think he's going to do some really good things at Miami. I think that's about as perfect a fit as you can have in terms of the recent coaching hires.
Absolutely, and they won this weekend. They played FAMU. 2 things stood out to me about that game. It was 70-3.
Right.
First of all, the first thing was it was 70-3. So that's Miami beating teams like Miami used to beat teams, and I think that's good. Even though FAMU was pretty much undermanned. Number 2, there are about 60,000 fans there at the what's called Hard Rock Stadium now down in Miami. And so, hey, Hard Rock and roll, that was great because I love to see the support because I worry about that with the Miami program not getting the support considering they're playing in that off-campus stadium, all that. That was number 2. Number 3, he's got 3 good backs. He's got a good quarterback. He's calling plays now from the sidelines. He's basically Steve Spurriering it. Spurriering it, I guess, because they asked him about the defense after the game, and in typical Steve Spurrier fashion, he was like, well, I just kind of focus on calling my plays and, running the offense. And so I'm like, yeah, but he's got a good defensive coordinator in Manny Diaz. They're very talented on the defensive line. Their receivers, they don't have the depth that they should because of some roster mismanagement. But I think in the Coastal Division, when you look at it, Miami could win that division. You don't know from year to year what you're going to get out of Georgia Tech. They hang in the balance every year because they're not very talented. It's all about the scheme. Virginia Tech, first year under Fuente, are they going to be that much better? Pittsburgh should be good. There's all these questions, I think, in that division. And I think Miami, which hasn't won it, could actually win it.
I'm totally with you. I think the division itself is not that strong to begin with. When you talk about the Coastal, the meat of that division is that by far and away the Atlantic. You got FSU, Clemson, and Louisville, all 3 of them in the same one. Paul Johnson will continue to put you to sleep with his offense at Tech, and they barely beat a bad Boston College team. Pitt is fine. Connor's a terrific comeback story from cancer, and but they're still undermanned overall. And Virginia Tech still has to kind of figure things out with life after Beamer. They're not quite the same juggernaut that they were a few years ago. But I think Miami has a very good chance of playing in that championship game. I totally agree. And I think Richt is going to do good things. We all know what Miami has going for it. Okay, they've got one of the best recruiting fertile grounds right there in the 305. So the talent is always going to be there. They have just been a model of misguided, poorly coached, unbelieving players with just a bad match all around. It just has not been a good fit for the boys in Coral Gables for a while. This is the fit. And if Miami can't win with Mark Richt, then something's wrong. And Richt, to your point, he can go out there and be pretty calm, cool, and collected. Mark Richt's a guy that strikes me who is very smart with his money. They're not going to fire him anytime soon. He did not exactly have a tough act to follow, and he's going to have fun again, which I don't think, having covered him a little bit here in Atlanta, I don't think Mark Richt was having a whole lot of fun coaching Georgia the last few years because he always felt like his job was in jeopardy, and 10 wins just wasn't enough. When Miami, I think what he is going to do will be enough, and he can enjoy life, call his plays, drive around in his Ram truck, enjoy the sun, go back to his hometown of Boca Raton, Florida, and be happy again. So I think that'll be a good run for him this year and years to come.
Absolutely. A quick take from last night. I think Florida State, to me, looking at it kind of outside of Alabama, which I know Alabama crushed USC, and they were very impressive. And Jalen Hurts, and I said this last spring when he signed that Jalen Hurts could be, out of all the quarterbacks in this class that we hear about, Jalen Hurts could be the best one. And certainly he was impressive on Saturday night. Outside of Alabama, which until they don't look like super team from the planet Super, I think that outside of Alabama, to me, Florida State's the most impressive team in the country. I know they fell behind to Ole Miss, but they took a blow, Mike.
Right.
And then they got up and rallied in like 1990s Florida State style fashion. Yeah. And DeAndre Francois, keep in mind, this is his first start. Shaky at the beginning, looked outstanding by the time that was over.
I'm going to use a catchy new term that you hear coaches use a lot. He can spin it. The boy can spin it. He's not just a guy that's going to run all over the place. He actually can thread the needle and be the type of guy that can really lead that team all the way. Because, first of all, you got one of the best running backs in the country behind him in Cook. You got a workhorse back. And then defensively, I know a lot of people probably watching that game in the first half and saying, well, boy, if Florida State doesn't really look good on defense, are they just down? Do they not have the athletes? It reminded me of when Florida State is bad. It's not because they don't have athletes on defense. I can't remember the last time Florida State didn't have athletes on defense. It's lack of discipline. It's bust in coverage, and you saw that early on. Chad Kelly and company were schooling them a little bit, and they got big, tall, athletic wide receivers, and they made some plays. But there was also some times where Florida State just looked completely discombobulated on defense. And then all of a sudden, they shirted up at halftime. Ole Miss is a lot of good things, but they're not real balanced. So you're asking Kelly to beat Florida State with him dropping back 45, 50 times on a given night. That's a lot to ask on any quarterback. They did not worry about Ole Miss's running game. And eventually, the talent of Florida State combined with a little bit more discipline and a little bit better execution was just too much. And when they shut Ole Miss out in the third quarter, that game was over. I mean, I'm sitting there, I'm struggling to keep my eyes open in the fourth because I didn't want to miss the ending. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, it's done. I mean, they figured it out on defense, and this kid Francois can actually throw the football and make plays, and that combined with Cook and everything else, Florida State's legit, folks. I mean, the time was last year maybe to try and pick on them a little bit. They had a little bit of vulnerability. They had that devastating loss to Georgia Tech on the block kick. But Florida State's going to be a force in 2016.
Absolutely. That Florida State-Clemson game is going to be incredible. Speaking of games I am looking forward to way in the future, just going off week one, and I know the opponents were overmatched. I thought Ohio State and Michigan both were very impressive. They went out there and executed, played a lot of players. I tend to think that even though their schedules are more challenging this year than maybe in the past with a couple of road games here and there that they could drop, I think they're on a collision course. And I think that this could be the year where you look at it and this game, this great rivalry, ends up being very big as far as the playoffs, the national rankings, all that good stuff. Because I love Jim I think Jim Harbaugh is a top 3 coach in all of football. If you look at how he's won stop after stop after stop after stop, including inheriting some very bad situations with the University of San Diego, Stanford, and then the 49ers. This is the best situation he's inherited. And it's his alma mater. It's Michigan. I think he's going to have them there. I don't think they're as talented top to bottom as Ohio State right now, but I think they're going to be there because they are going to win. Ohio State, to me, even though they lost however many players to the NFL, they've just replaced talent with talent. It's like Clemson's defense last year. I wasn't worried about Clemson's defense last year because you looked at it and you saw, well, these guys are gone, but these are the guys replacing them, so they should be okay. I think that's the way it is at OSU this year. Curtis Samuel is an outstanding kind of multifaceted player, the kind Urban Meyer loves. You got J.T. Barrett at quarterback. Their defense is going to be just fine. I think right now, just eyeballing the Big Ten, and no offense to Wisconsin, who won a huge game, I think those are the obvious two top-class teams in the league, and it's going to be between those two schools.
Which would be great for college football, with all due respect to the rest of the Big Ten Conference. I think we want to see Ohio State, Michigan playing late in the season for where everything is on the line in late November. That's the way you want to have it. That's the way it was for a while, and that's the way, unfortunately, it has not been due to Michigan's drop, and for a while there, Ohio State before Urban got there. By the way, has J.T. Barrett been at Ohio State for 7 years, or how is that kid only a junior?
Seems that way. Yeah,
it seems like he's been there forever. I only see in conference 2 games where those teams are going to at least sweat. For Ohio State at Wisconsin, that's October the 15th. For Michigan at Michigan State, October the 29th. I just don't see anybody else in that league. I know some people are trying to make the case the Big Ten's deeper than it's been. You're putting a lot of stock in the Wisconsin win over LSU to say that, but I'm not feeling the rest of it. I'm just, to me, it's a 2-team league. I don't see Michigan State sneaking up this year and pulling that off. So I think you're right. I think we got a collision course, Ohio State, Michigan, and then, you'll have somebody else out of that conference that can do some good things, but I don't think anybody else out of that league this year is a true contender for the playoff.
Absolutely. The Pac-12, I think this is the year the Washington Huskies return to the national spotlight. Chris Peterson being hired there, Mike, I thought was an underrated type of hire. There wasn't a lot of hype about it. I'm like, man, these guys just went out and hired one of the best coaches in college football. I mean, he's had opportunities at USC, UCLA, other places like that. He chose to go to Washington. Built upon that, I thought they were very impressed. I know it was Rutgers that they were playing. Rutgers has a new coach, but Rutgers usually isn't that much of a pushover. 48-10. I thought Washington was really good. Right now, I kind of see them as the class of the Pac-12.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, because the Pac-12 has some kind of eye-popping names. You got Josh Rosen at UCLA, who didn't exactly have a great performance in the second half against A&M. Really the whole game, he had some critical turnovers. You've got Christian McCaffrey, who, for my money, was the Heisman Trophy winner last season with what he did, and he's still a tremendous player. Southern Cal's got a great wideout in Schuster. And Washington doesn't have maybe the names, the sex appeal that a lot of people kind of associate when they start thinking of who the best teams are. But top to bottom, I'm with you. And I do think it was a tremendous coaching hire. I think we lose sight of Washington. And there was a time where UW was a heck of a program. Yeah. and it's a beautiful campus near Seattle. They got a lot of things going for them out there, but they were dead and buried there for a while. They made some questionable coaching hires, had a lot of things go wrong. It's good to see UW back. I mean, I'm glad that the Huskies are actually in the discussion again. I don't see the Pac-12 with a playoff team this year. I think they're the one conference that's got the best chance of being left out. Mm-hmm. But I do think Washington has the best chance of winning the league in 2016.
Absolutely. All right, wrapping it up here, Mike. 3 quick takes on this coming weekend for college football. What are you looking for? What are some things that you're going to be kind of glancing at when you roll it around on the tube this weekend?
Well, I think we're going to see it's going to be more status quo than week one. We don't have the level of matchups. This is what happens, unfortunately, when we do have an unbelievable week one, then we have a little bit of a letdown in week two. We've got a lot of lopsided matchups, particularly in the SEC. It just seems like a lot of teams kind of feast on the lesser opponents. I think it's an interesting game. I want to see, can Arkansas kind of put it together under Brett Bielema? They struggled against La Tech at home. Not exactly an inspiring effort, although Skip Holtz has done a good job with that program. I don't know if that game should have been as close. They lost an NFL running back last year, Tech did, and so I thought that would be a little more lopsided. That they go to TCU. I think that's an interesting matchup, little SEC Big 12 action. You mentioned it near the top, Mississippi State, South Carolina. First one to 20 points wins it, JC. I mean, come on. Neither one of these teams are going to light it up. I think that Mississippi State, don't judge them just on South Alabama. That's obviously a bad loss, and it's going to sting them for a while. But they do have some players there. It's not as if they're just chopped liver. For whatever reason, they got caught with their guard down. They paid dearly for it, and of course, the kid misses a 28-yard field goal off the left hash to lose the game. And the other one that we talked about earlier is Tennessee, Virginia Tech. I want to see Tennessee bounce back. Tennessee, I think we're all in the camp now. You got to show me something. I don't even want to just see you win the game. I want to see you really put it together. I want to see Joshua Dobbs making plays with his arm. I want to see that running game with Hurd and Kamara. I mean, I want to see them run for a couple hundy. I don't think that's too much to ask. If you really want me to buy in all the way on Tennessee, not just as a team that can win the East, but maybe even contend in Atlanta for a title, you got to win this game, and you got to look good in the process. So those are some of the games kind of in the Southeast that I'll be looking at on Saturday. That, and I'll be getting caught up on a great documentary, Last Chance U. If you haven't seen this on Netflix, JC, you of all people would love this thing. 6 episodes, I promise you, and our listeners here on this podcast, that you will enjoy about 5 hours of programming. Just sit there and binge on it. It's incredible.
I'll have to check that out, definitely. I'm looking forward to this weekend, certainly. I'm with you on those 3 games. You know, Gary Patterson, to me, is an excellent coach, and Brett Bielema, you know, is another one of my kind of favorite coaches, and that's kind of a contrast of styles offensively. You know, defensively, they both are teams that should do. TCU gave up a lot of points and yards this past weekend, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there in Fort Worth. That's a big game for TCU, having Arkansas come to their place.
It is.
I think with South Carolina, Mississippi State, you know, I think the Gamecocks are going to have to play better on offense to win that football game. I think Mississippi State, and I'm with you, don't judge them just on South Alabama. You know, sometimes teams lose a game like that and they have a hangover and they don't play well for it takes them a couple of weeks to work out of it. Sometimes they come back with a vengeance. Mississippi State's not going to attack the South Carolina defense like Vanderbilt did. They're going to get on the perimeter and try to tempo them, and that's a different type of challenge. That's a different challenge for the South Carolina defense, I think, in that game. And then the big one in Bristol. You know, once again, I'm happy they're playing this game, happy for the people in Bristol, happy for all the Vols and Hokies that I know, and I know a bunch of them. Can't wait to see it. But when you get down to the football aspect of it, you know, Virginia Tech, you know, they beat Liberty 36-13 in Fuente's opener. But, you know, man, Justin Fuente's a heck of a coach. Bud Foster, you have to know that Bud Foster, just like he did with Ohio State a couple of summers ago, he's been sitting there game planning for the Vols all summer. And this guy, when he's on it, he's on it, you know, you know, so Tennessee needs to come out on offense and establish themselves and make some plays and put some points on the board, or it could get really, really dicey. And
you know what? If that scenario happens, and you're right, Bud Foster can scheme them up as well as any DC in the country. If Tennessee lays another egg and they wind up losing this game, you're going to see a mass exodus of people that thought Tennessee was the team to beat. Even though we haven't played a conference game yet, or at least Tennessee will not have. I think you're going to see kind of the pundits and fans and all kinds of people that love college football. They're going to start looking for somebody else in the East to pick. Yeah. They're going to say, okay, is it Florida? Is it Georgia? Who is it going to be? Because my money is now no longer on Tennessee. They're taking their chips off of that spot on the table. So that might not mean anything in the long run, because at the end of the day, it's who you beat's not what everybody thinks. but you're going to see a tremendous change of opinion on Tennessee overall, because that's just the way it is. You are what you've done through, in this case, week 2. And week 1 was an egg that you were real fortunate to win. Week 2, you better bring something to the table more than that. Otherwise, it's hard to believe that Tennessee, even in a down year for the East, is going to win that division if they look bad in the first 2 games of the year with a veteran team, not a bunch of young players, a veteran team on both sides of the football.
Yeah, and they have to go through the gauntlet later in the season, too,
right.
like we mentioned earlier. I mean, that's got to be tough. Well, that's the first episode of JC and Morgan in the books. It flew by, my man, but it was a lot of fun, and certainly we appreciate all you guys listening. And Mike, tell everybody where we can I'll tell everybody where they can find me. Tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter for your outstanding takes on the world of sports, life, TV, and everything else.
Documentaries, you name it.
Yeah.
First of all, I just want to say this was a life-altering experience, my first podcast. I know you're kind of a savvy veteran at this, so I appreciate you kind of leading the way on this bad boy, and hopefully we can entertain some folks, help you folks out there kill an hour of your day, whether it's driving or I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm on a plane, what have you, traveling around the land, and that's what I'll be doing this weekend, going to Nashville. And I've got Vanderbilt, Middle Tennessee on the SEC network. I'm going to tell you right now, Rick Stockstill and company, they're not just going to go in there and lay down for Coach Mason and the Commodores. Middle Tennessee's got a quarterback that threw for 4,000 last year. It happens to be the coach's son. They've got some athletes. That could be a little dangerous catch a game if you're not careful, kind of a trap game if you're Vanderbilt coming off that tough loss to South Carolina. So looking forward to going ahead and calling that, and then watching a whole lot of college football when we're not on the air. Should be another good weekend, not quite as good as week 1, but still pretty good. And as always, Twitter handles @MorganOnAir. Love to hear from college football fans everywhere.
All right, for Mike Morgan, this is JC Shurburtt. This has been the JC and Morgan podcast. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you next episode.